Well, hello again, my friends and fellow Invisibles. This is going to be an impromptu lecture. It's not going to be, actually, it's not really going to be a lecture. It's going to be more of a chat. But I feel it necessary to put in a few words because of these horrific events that have been taking place in Israel, in the Gaza area. To say I find this appalling is just, well, it doesn't do it justice. To hear about people going around waking people up and just killing them and killing children and cutting the heads off babies, it's just so horrific. It's just difficult to comprehend even. But I'm not going to be talking about the politics of the situation. That's not my remit. I believe that most of what's happening in the world at the moment is kind of caught up with this whole end days situation we find ourselves in. And the forces that are directing what's happening are not human. The person we have to, if you can use the word person, we have to thank for all this is Satan. Now you might say, "Oh, Adrian, you don't believe in the devil, do you?" Yes, I do actually, and I believe in demons as well. And you go, "Oh no, that's like believing in Father Christmas." Well, if it's believing in Father Christmas, I'm in good company because Jesus Christ himself used to cast out devils wherever he went. And he had conversations with Satan. And, it was Satan that organized for his crucifixion. So if you don't believe in those things, you don't believe in demons, you don't believe in Satan, then you're not a Christian. You might say, "Well, I'm not a Christian. I don't care at all about Christianity." Well, in that case, you better be prepared for some very strange things that you're going to see, that in your lifetime, almost certainly, you're going to have experience of, because the situation as it's been going on now for 2,000 years is not going to continue for very much longer. We are living in the end days. And I've put lots of videos out about this. I actually took a party of people out to Egypt and then on to Israel in the year 2000 to witness certain events which were being prophesied by the signs in the sky. And we witnessed these in Egypt and again in Jerusalem. And I have to tell you, I have a great affection for both Egypt and Israel. Egypt was the original Holy Land, but the light went from them because of their abominations, the sorcery that was going on and the magic and the dark side that they had turned to. And the light was given to the Israelites, the Hebrews, and they took it from Egypt to Israel, which became the new Holy Land. And what makes somewhere a holy land is the idea that God dwells among us, actually on this earth. Now, the Bible is full of stories about this. You meet with this on the Exodus, don't you? When God appears on the mountain in the form of the burning bush and tells Moses or gives him tablets of stone with the laws of the new covenant that he's setting up with the Israelites. And then they put the stones in the Ark of the Covenant, a carrying box, and they take those with them. And that is the contract between the Israelites and the divine, that God will help them as long as they keep his covenant. And the way they keep his covenant is to keep his commandments, the laws, the 10 Commandments. And of course they backslide all the time, don't they? And then they have to apologize and repent, and they're have to do certain things, and then they're forgiven, and then maybe they fall again. This goes on through the Old Testament. And then we get to the situation where the Ark of the Covenant is put inside the temple. And the Ark of the Covenant, the whole idea of the temple is the idea that God is living in the temple. That's what temples were in the ancient world. And the Egyptians, in their writings, tell us how their gods lived with them. But once, the energy, it's an energy form, a light. They call it the Shekinah in Hebrew, the light that shines there. And that light had been in Egypt before then, I believe. But it's then moved. So that's what made Israel the Holy Land. But then, because of their sinning, their backsliding, the Shekinah left the temple. And then you had the conquest of Jerusalem by the Babylonians and the destruction of the temple and the destruction of the city and the people being taken away into captivity. And you had then them coming back, rebuilding Jerusalem, repairing the temple, and then it was rebuilt again at the time of Herod. And then we have the story of Jesus. And the light is not living in the temple of Herod, it's living in Jesus himself. So he's able to do all these miracles, he's able to cast out devils, he has a light about him. And this is the new covenant of Christianity. So you have these two covenants. You've got the Old Testament covenant, which is from the time of the Exodus, when the Israelites went out of Egypt. And then you have this new covenant, the New Testament, from the time of Jesus. And that includes all who profess Christianity and follow its rules and laws. So that's what we're talking about here. Now, we have some prophecies that I wanted to read out to you that I think you might find particularly interesting in this context. And I'm going to read out a couple of bits to you. Just let me find my place. I have it on my Kindle. Now, the first bit I'm going to read out to you comes from the book of Revelation, chapter 12. And it writes here, "And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars." Right, so that seems to be kind of an image of the planet, actually. When you first think about it, the moon under her feet, well, the moon is under the feet, and the planet Earth does receive the light from the sun. "But she was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains and the agony of giving birth. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems." Right, so diadems represent rulerships. The 7 heads, 7 kings, and 10 horns, 10 speaking people. We meet this concept of 7 heads, 10 horns all over the place in the book of Revelation. It's also repeated with the mark of the beast and who the beast is. It's actually, in this case, it's talking about Satan, the devil, and he's casting down, his tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. So that's saying that stars represent lights and they represent angels. So it's saying he can't cast down 1/3 of the angels down to the earth. It's an awful lot, isn't it, of the ones you can see, I presume, not the ones you can't see. It's an awful lot of angels being cast down to the earth. He doesn't want to be thrown down here on his own. "And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she bore her child, he might devour it." Now, I want to explain something else. In many of these prophecies in the Bible, you have a macrocosmic image and you have a microcosmic image. The macrocosmic image can be images to do with the sun, the moon, the stars, space, the universe, whatever. The bigger whole, the larger whole. The microcosmic image then becomes on the human scale, what's happening. So the woman with the 12 stars around her head, she represents not just the earth, although that can be part of the explanation of that image, but also a woman. And this woman represents the kingdom of Israel. Now, Israel originally was 12 tribes, one for each star, one for each sign of the zodiac. The 12 tribes, you know the names, the 12 sons of Jacob. And they formed the kingdom of Israel. The original kingdom of Israel had 12 tribes. But then that kingdom was divided after the time of Solomon. And you had a separate northern kingdom which carried on calling itself Israel. And that had 10 tribes. And you had a southern kingdom that was called Judah, after the leading tribe. There's two tribes in that one, Judah and Benjamin, along with the priesthood of Levi. So you had these two kingdoms then, and mostly they sort of worked together, but they did have wars between them as well. And the northern kingdom in particular went off the rails very early on. They had kings of their own, people with the names such as Ahab, and you had Jezebel. You remember? You heard of Jezebel, the wicked woman, the queen, and you had other kings there. And eventually they went so bad they were worshipping idols and doing all the things they weren't meant to do in the Ten Commandments. So they were banished from the land. And God, it says in the Bible, brought the Assyrians to their land, and they were carried away into captivity. And they're called the lost tribes of Israel, the lost 10 tribes of Israel. And the Assyrians also went on and took away most of the Jews, the ones who weren't living in Jerusalem, all the other cities, and they took them away as well. So it actually should be called the lost 12 tribes, apart from a remnant who were left in Judea, in Jerusalem, and they survived, and then they eventually were taken away by the Babylonians, or most of them, to Babylon. They were kept there for 70 years, and then they eventually were able to return and rebuild their temple and start again. And the descendants of those people are among the Jews that we know today. I say among because there were also people who were converted to Judaism, just as there are people who were converted to Christianity who weren't descended from either Jews or Israelites. You had many people converted, particularly the Khazars, the nation of Khazaria, which was in what's now southern Russia and part of Ukraine. And those people converted to Judaism, didn't convert to Islam or to Christianity, they chose Judaism. So the world we live in is much more complicated than you think. And the Ashkenazi Jews mostly are descended from the Khazars, but that doesn't really matter. They are Jews by adoption, but God likes that. If you adopt to do his way and live by his covenant, he will accept you as, just as good as a son of Abraham, as it were. So I have no difficulty about whether the Jewish people are Sephardic, that's descended from the Jews who lived mostly in Spain, or the Eastern Jews who were the Ashkenazi. They're all Jews, in my opinion. Now, the situation we have is that the dragon we read of here, he's really angry with this woman. So it goes on, she gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne. So this child that Israel, this woman Israel, gives birth to is Jesus Christ, the Messiah. He should be called Yeshua in Hebrew. Many Jews don't realize that Jesus was actually Jewish. They think he's perhaps a Roman or a Christian from Europe. He's not. He actually was Jewish, and his teachings was all done in Judea, in their land. So the rejection of Jesus was a very big thing, and it is going to be reversed. This is prophesied that the Jews will come back to Jesus Christ and recognize him when he comes back as being their Messiah that they've been waiting for, but not yet. So he was called up to his throne, and a woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1260 days. Now this woman is the mother of all 12 tribes, not just the 2 who remained in Jerusalem. And that home that she's fled to was actually the British Isles. That sounds ridiculous to say that, doesn't it? But we know now from DNA studies, for example, that there's a strong connection between Britain and the Middle East, and it's also in the Welsh records too. We know that there were traders going between the British Isles and the Middle East because Britain was a rich place to obtain tin. It's the nearest place. You had to go all the way to India or somewhere if you didn't get your tin from Britain. And the Phoenician ships used to come regularly to Cornwall to collect the tin. The Britons themselves also had traditions about coming from the Turkey area, from Troy. And that's a whole other story I'll tell you about some other time. But they'd done DNA research on the descendants of King Tutankhamun and his family of Egypt. And they found that in Egypt itself, only around 2% of the population had the marker genes of Tutankhamun. Then they found when they went to Europe, around the Black Sea area, they found a much higher level. I think it's around about 20 or 30%. And as they went further west into Europe, I think in Germany it was around 40%. In France, it got up to 60%. But in Britain and Spain, it was 70%. And what that tells us is that people came from the Middle East with that marker gene by sea. Because if you're going, on to Britain and Spain, you would go by the maritime route, sailing, and you could be sailing from Egypt. Now, there were many other things I could tell you about this to do with weights and measures and connections with Egypt, and the Stone of Destiny in particular. If you haven't heard of it, the Stone of Destiny is the coronation stone of Great Britain. And I've actually worked out from its geometry and the geometry deriving from it that it has the codes for building a true pyramid. One just like in the right shape for the Great Pyramid. And it also has other secrets too. That is our coronation stone. And I think that was the ancient Egyptian equivalent of having the tables of the law that Moses took away. This was their covenant stone. It was in their throne. It was what they call the Ben stone. And it seems that the Israelites took that away with them when they departed from Egypt and went to Israel. And perhaps they put it in the box even. Or maybe they carried it separately. But anyway, it was taken to first Ireland at the time of the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians, or just after. It was taken to Ireland along with the princess of the royal house. She married the King of Ireland. And then that stone and the kingship was taken to Scotland. and eventually it was taken to England, uh, and it became our coronation stone for 700 years, till 1996 when it was taken back to Scotland. It's kind of interesting that 700, that period of 7 seems to have a particular meaning there, and seems to have triggered something else that happened, which was the beginning of the destruction of the British Kingdom. But that's another story too. Um, we are in a situation now where we're well into the book of Revelation. I'll just get this up again and see how the story continues. So the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God in which she is to be nourished for 1260 days. Then it says, Satan thrown down to earth. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. And he is thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. And when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. Right, so the devil in his wrath is after the woman, Israel, the 12 tribes Israel, which is in Europe. It's not just in Britain, it's all of the Christian world. But the woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness, to the place where she is to be nourished for a time and times and half a time. The serpent poured water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon became furious with the woman, and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. And he stood on the sand of the sea. So what this is all about, I believe, is actually the foundation of America. The eagle's wings that are given to the woman, and the wilderness she goes to, is America. And she goes there, and the dragon is wrath, and he pours out from his mouth a torrent, but it's swallowed. The river he pours out is swallowed by the ocean. He can't reach her. She's on the other side of the Atlantic, and he can't get to grips with that. The torrent that he pours out the river is people, actually. That's a common image in the Revelation. But she's kept safe there in America until the end times. So he goes off to make war against her seed, and that's war against Europe, and causing all sorts of trouble and outcries and world wars and so on. And this is going on right now in even more intensity. And this is why you're seeing all these culture wars and all the denigration of the white race, because the white race contains the 12 tribes of Israel, and it's also the core of Christendom. So the attack is twofold. One is through taking away their religion, persuading them to become materialistic, persuading them to believe in uh, things that go against the scriptures. For instance, Darwin's theory of evolution. There's no proof for Darwin's theory of evolution. There are breaks in the series supposed to go up the tree, and no connection links between extinct species that happens very suddenly and new species that suddenly appear. There should be other species in between making a ladder, but they're not there. And the simple answer is that species are not evolved on Earth, they're brought here. They're brought here. This is like a garden, and in the gardener doesn't only play around with his own plants, he goes out to the garden centre and buys more, doesn't he, and brings them and puts them in his garden. And it's the same here on Earth. The species are brought here, and they can be adapted, to a certain degree, but a whole new species requires whole new genetic coding, and that's a very, very complex thing. It's not something that happens by accident any more than a computer program does. So we have these false doctrines fed to us, and we've been brought to the conclusion that we're just sort of robots, really, that there's nothing to us, so we're just intelligent animals, and when you die, that's it. But that's not true. You're actually spirits living in bodies, and there's good reasons for that. But again, that goes beyond what I want to talk about here. But anyway, the dragon is going after the woman and her seed, and he's doing it in several different ways. First of all, by spreading this sort of wokeness that would persuade men to get themselves castrated and women to have their ovaries removed, because they want to be the other sex. And well, they can't be. You cannot. You can't change. That's not going to happen. All you can do is make yourself neuter, and then you can't have children. And that's what the devil wants. He doesn't want you to have children. He wants you to die out. He wants your genetics to die out. And his other things he does is he wants to bring about your death, and certainly the death of the Jews. And that's what you're seeing happening in Israel today. The whole aim of these terrorist groups is to eliminate the Jews. It's a continuation of Hitler's Holocaust. They want to exterminate all the Jews. They hate them. They hate them. Why? Because the Jewish race gave birth to Jesus Christ, the Messiah. That's why. And he doesn't want anything like that to ever happen again. He's coming back. It's going to be the devil and his angels, and anyone who is allied with them is going to be thrown down. It tells you that. So it's very unwise at this time to be following pathways of magic and corruption and all those abominations. You'd be very wise to get your Bible out again and learn the Ten Commandments and start living by them. And wish say sorry for what you've done before. That's the wise thing to do, because we haven't got much time. And the other thing I wanted to read to you is a couple more bits here. And I was going to read you from the book of Isaiah. Let's read that first. Hang on. Isaiah was one of Jesus' favourite books. He quotes from it quite a lot. But here we have, I'm going to read you Isaiah chapter 19, sorry. It's verse 5. Right. Now it goes on like this. Behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and comes to Egypt, and the idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. And I will stir up Egyptians against Egyptians, and they will fight each against another, and each against his neighbour, city against city, kingdom against kingdom. And the spirit of the Egyptians within them will be emptied out, and I will confound their counsel. And they will inquire of the idols and the sorcerers and the mediums and the necromancers, and I will give over the Egyptians into the hand of a hard master, and a fierce king will rule over them, declares the Lord God of hosts. Now I think that's probably a prophecy that goes back to the time of the Assyrians, or maybe it's the Babylonians who invaded Egypt and conquered it. Or it might be the Persians who also conquered Egypt. But then we go to another prophecy which I think is for this time. And the waters of the sea will be dried up, and the river will be dry and parched, and its canals will become foul, and the branches of Egypt's Nile will diminish and dry up. Reeds and rushes will rot away. There will be bare places by the Nile, on the brink of the Nile, and all that is sown by the Nile will be parched, will be driven away, and will be no more. The fishermen will mourn and lament, all who cast a hook in the Nile, and they will languish who spread nets on the water. The workers in combed flax will be in despair, and the weavers of white cotton. Those who are the pillars of the land will be crushed, and all who work for pay will be grieved. Right, so we have a situation where Egypt, the Nile, is drying up. And we also have the same thing in the Revelation, talking about the drying up of the Euphrates River. I'm not going to read that to you, but you'll find that in the book of Revelation, chapter 16, verse 12. But when is that happening? Well, it's actually happening now. The river Euphrates has been drying up for the last few years, and it's partly because of, you might call it climate change, or particularly hot, dry weather, but it's also because the Turks further upstream have built massive dams, and they're taking the water away from the Euphrates and using it to irrigate their own fields. There are dams also in Syria, but the Euphrates River is drying up, and it's having a disastrous effect on Syria. Where most outside of Turkey, Syria is where mostly the Euphrates goes through, and it meets with the river Tigris right down at the Gulf of Persia, right down beyond Basra. The two rivers come together right next to the sea. So this is having a disastrous effect on the agriculture and the lives of the Syrians, as if they haven't got enough happening to them with all the awful wars that have been going on, and ISIS and all of that. But in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, it says this is happening so that the kings of the east can cross over to attack Israel. Now, I'll come back to that. But also the River Nile is drying up now for much the same reasons. They're building a huge new dam in Ethiopia on the Blue Nile, which is the one that supplies the majority of the water of the Nile. So they have a whole planned sequence of dams they're building in Ethiopia so that they can get hydroelectric power and also use the water to water their own fields, to avoid droughts and problems. But that's disastrous for people further downstream in Sudan and in Egypt. It's going to cause wars, probably. It's certainly going to cause famine. And I know that there are big debates going on in the UN about this, and Egypt is complaining about it. But it is happening, and this is something that, as I just read to you, is prophesied in the Bible. But I want to read another thing to you. And this is concerning the end times, and it's a good prophecy for Egypt and also Assyria, which is Syria, we call it now, is the western part of Assyria. There was an eastern part as well in northern Iraq, and that would be included as well. So it says here, in that day the Egyptians will be like women and tremble with fear before the hand of the Lord of hosts shakes over them. And the land of Judah will become a terror to the Egyptians. Well, it is, isn't it? It's a very powerful nation, the Israeli nation now. Everyone to whom it is mentioned will fear because of the purpose that the Lord of hosts has proposed of it against them. In that day there will be 5 cities in the land of Egypt that speak the language of Canaan and swear allegiance to the Lord of hosts. One of those will be called the City of Destruction. In that day there will be an altar to the Lord in the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar to the Lord at its border. It will be a sign and a witness to the Lord of hosts in the land of Egypt. When they cry to the Lord because of oppressors, he will send them a saviour and a defender and deliver them. And the Lord will make himself known to the Egyptians, and the Egyptians will know the Lord in that day, and worship with sacrifice and offering. And they will make vows to the Lord and perform them. And the Lord will strike Egypt, striking and healing. And they will return to the Lord, and he will listen to their pleas for mercy and heal them. In that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and Assyria will come into Egypt, and Egypt into Assyria, and the Egyptians will worship with the Assyrians. In that day Israel will be the third, with Egypt and Assyria, a blessing in the midst of the earth, whom the Lord of hosts has blessed, saying, Blessed be Egypt, my people, and Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance. So he's talking about an alliance between Egypt and Assyria, and Israel is in between the two. And a highway will go up from Egypt, have to go through Israel, and it will go to probably Damascus, up to Assyria, maybe up a bit further north. Now, recognize something here. The churches, the Syrian church, the Syriani, they have been under terrible persecution from ISIS and the fanatics of extremist Islam there. Meanwhile, in Egypt, the Copts, who are the Christians of Egypt, about 10% of the population, they've been under terrible persecution by the extremists there. They've been burning down their churches, killing them, robbing their tombs. This kind of thing. It's not talked about much in the press, and I think on the whole, the Christians want to keep it that way. They don't want to stir it up any further. So that you've got these Christian communities under pressure in both those places. So I could see a day when the Egyptians turn to the to God, the Judeo-Christian God. And very interestingly, there was the longest and most important apparition of the Virgin Mary, happened in 1968, I think it was. For 2 years, she kept appearing on top of the church, actually in Cairo, in Zaytun. You can look this up on the internet. Apparition of the Virgin Mary at Zaytun, Zeitoun. How she had, first of all, I think in the early 20th century, asked someone to build her a church there, and he built a church there. And then in the 60s, she did these appearances, and it'd been filmed and photographed, and hundreds of thousands of people saw this. It wasn't just a few children seeing what nobody else could see. Hundreds of thousands of people saw this. Now, I want you to understand something. If an apparition like that can happen, what makes you think we're not going to get a big apparition of Jesus Christ happening worldwide? What makes you think that's impossible? And what about if, in the Bible story we read about Jesus coming to his apostles, walking through the wall, and then saying, he must have materialized the physical body as well. He told Thomas to put his fingers in the holes in his hands and in his side. He must have been able to materialize a physical body to do that, and then dematerialize it when he ascended to heaven. If you're a Christian, you need to believe these things. So I believe that we are going to see the reappearance of Jesus Christ coming, as he said, just the same way that Mary was appearing on top of this church for 2 years. She kept coming back, and hundreds of thousands of people saw it. It's not talked about, is it? Well, he says he's coming back to the Mount of Olives, and that's where he supposedly rose to heaven from. You come back where you left. So um, I'm telling you these things because I want you to see that the prophecies in the Bible can be understood as having relevance to our day. And I've done a lot more on the Book of Revelation. I've put 26 hour-long programs for free on YouTube. You can watch, going through it chapter by chapter, almost line by line. So do watch those, and I've put other things, in there as well. And I'm going to be doing many more lectures, structured ones. This is just a chat. I put it in here because I want you to see that what we're seeing happening in Israel is a persecution of the Jews. The desire there is the devil's desire to destroy them completely. It was the same thing motivated to the Holocaust in Germany and Poland and Eastern Europe, to destroy the Jews. What's happening now with the Ukraine war is something different, but I'll talk to you about that another time. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope I haven't scared you too much, but we're living in important times, and you need to recognise that. And don't have to listen to me, but do listen to your own conscience and your own path, and look, be prepared, be awake and ready for when these things are going to happen. So thank you very much.